The winter of 1943 battered the state of Connecticut with biting winds and heavy snow. Inside the Republic Aviation Complex, workers passed through the metal gates, rubbing their hands together to ward off the cold. The air held the smell of heated metal and burnt oil. Everyone there knew the world was at war. They knew the factory produced not just airplanes, but tools to keep alive men fighting thousands of miles away. And they also knew that the urgency allowed no room for error. Right in the first hangar rested the central creature of that effort, the Pratt & Whitney R-2800 double wasp engine. With its 18 cylinders arranged in 2 layers, it was so large and heavy that it required 3 men to position it on the main workbench. When started, it vibrated as if it had a life of its own, spreading a deep hum that seemed to pierce through bones. The engineers studied every joint, every valve, every gear tooth. Everyone understood that this engine was the soul of the new airplane. A robust, disproportionate fighter, capable of surviving in conditions that would destroy other aircraft. The name still echoed through the corridors with a certain weight. P-47 Thunderbolt. The Lightning. Before becoming an icon, it was a work of steel and sweat. The construction process began with the fuselage, assembled in enormous sections that resembled the ribs of a prehistoric creature. Workers positioned stringers, adjusted ribs, and fastened panels with hundreds of incandescent rivets. Each click of the pneumatic hammer filled the air with small metallic echoes. The wings were assembled in another sector. They resembled metal bridges, supported by hydraulic jacks while technicians checked alignment and rigidity. The internal ribs had to be perfect, as they would need to withstand colossal forces during combat dives. The work was repetitive, but fraught with tension. Each piece needed to fit perfectly. Every poorly placed rivet could mean life or death for someone in the future. In the electrical sector, cables were run like veins between the inner plates of the hull. Small lights were tested. Connections were tightened. Nothing could come loose, vibrate, or fail. The P-47 slowly took shape, with its rounded and imposing silhouette. So heavy that many questioned how something that size could move with agility in the sky. But the Thunderbolt wasn't born to be delicate. It was born to withstand blows that would destroy any other Allied fighter. Among the workers was a young welder named Margaret Doyle. She stood out not only for her skill but also for the intensity with which she approached each task. Her brother, Thomas, had been sent to northern France months before. No letters had arrived since then. Margaret kept his picture folded in her jumpsuit pocket. Whenever he welded an important section of the fuselage, he touched the crumpled edge of the image as if he could reinforce the metal with his own hope. "Come home, please," he would sometimes murmur, while the electric arc shot bright blue sparks around him. The entire factory carried similar stories. Fathers, mothers, siblings, friends. The construction of the P-47 wasn't just production. It was a silent pact between families and destiny. After weeks of assembly, testing, and revisions, the prototype was finally ready. The technicians removed the last support structures and pushed the plane outside, braving the icy wind that cut across the outer yard. Test pilot Lowry Brannigan approached, observing every detail. He knew the weight of the plane. He knew the initial reputation circulating among the mechanics. Too heavy, too wide, too demanding. Brannigan climbed into the cockpit. The seat creaked slightly under his weight. He adjusted his seatbelts, checked the instruments, tested the levers. Everything seemed strange, more spacious and robust than in the other fighters he had flown. When the engine started, the entire ground trembled. The sound was deep, low, almost animalistic. The propeller cut through the wind with brutal force. The plane vibrated as if it were eager to get out of there. Brannigan accelerated. The P-47 gained speed without elegance. The fuselage seemed to fight against its own weight. But, a few seconds later, the wheels lost contact with the ground and the giant finally took off, steady and determined. It was like watching a creature learn to fly against all odds. During that first flight, something became clear. The Thunderbolt wasn't made for aerobatics. It was made to survive. Months later, the first P-47s arrived in Europe, destined for the 56th Fighter Group, the future Wolfpack. The pilots observed the aircraft with strangeness. "It looks like a tractor with wings," one of them said. "Does it fly?" "That'll fall on the enemy," another replied, laughing. The distrust lasted exactly until the first real combat. The Thunderbolt dove into low-level attacks with impressive speed. It was capable of absorbing damage that would tear apart any other Allied fighter. The pilots quickly discovered this. They could return with gigantic holes in their wings, leaking oil, ripped-off panels, and still land with relative safety. The R-2800 engine continued to function even when punctured. The self-sealing fuel tanks prevented instant fires. The thick fuselage protected the pilot like a flying armored vest. The Thunderbolt transformed fear into courage. It transformed insecurity into confidence. It transformed suicide attacks into achievable missions. The 7.50 caliber machine guns mounted on the wings unleashed a continuous stream of destruction capable of tearing through train tracks, columns of vehicles, and enemy bomber formations. The plane was not just resistant. It was aggressive. It was ferocious. And that was exactly what the U.S. needed in the air war over Europe. Back in the United States, while the front lines reported victories thanks to the brutal performance of the P-47, the factory continued its frenetic pace. Margaret finally received a letter with the military postmark. Her hands trembled as she opened it. The text was short. Her brother Thomas was alive, but wounded. He had been rescued by pilots providing air cover during the retreat. Pilots flying the very plane she helped assemble every day. At that moment, the weight of her work acquired a completely new meaning. Each weld, each reinforcement, each rib assembled was, literally, a chance at life for someone. The P-47 had ceased to be just a machine and had become a bridge between families separated by the war. By the end of 1945, the war was over. Production gradually ceased. The factory, once deafening, had become a silent environment. The assembly lines were emptied. Equipment shut down. Panels covered with tarpaulins. Margaret walked among the abandoned structures. The last P-47, incomplete, remained on trestles like a monument to a recent and brutal time. She touched the cold fuselage and took a deep breath. This last plane would have no destiny. It would never fly. But it represented everything that had been done, achieved, and sacrificed. The war was over, but the machines would remain as witnesses to a period where the impossible needed to be built daily to prevent something much worse. The Thunderbolt had survived the war, and the world had survived with it.